Throughout the early to mid-1800s, when slavery engrossed America, Sarah and Angelina Grimke took a stand against slavery by traveling through America with speeches and books, which eventually supplied a voice to those who opposed slavery and reversed the eventual view of African Americans as property. Do you believe in treating humans as property and stripping their natural rights from them based on skin color alone, gender? The Grimke sisters did not. They believed in human rights and spoke about it vigorously throughout the United States. We argue that the Grimke sisters took a stand against slavery by speaking out about it throughout America, being vivid supporters, and writing letters to convey their support against a strongly hated movement. They never let the opposition of others restrain them from fighting in what they believed in. The Grimke sisters were doing a job that was not normal at the time. They spoke out against slavery when it wasn't normal for women to speak in public, let alone speak in public, especially out against the white male community. Slavery was prominent, and having grown up from a Southern family that owned slaves themselves, it was especially hard for the Grimkes to execute their stand efficiently. The sisters grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, with their family owning slaves. They lived in a big white house that was on a plantation, and the sisters spent most of their time at their house during their childhood. It is a house where Angelina taught one of their slaves to read. According to Dr. Louise Knight, as from our interview, she stated that their mother,
Mary Grimke, thought that her daughters were representing appalling behavior.
When the sisters moved to Pennsylvania and joined the American Anti-Slavery Society, they started to sever their bond with their family. However, they did visit back home occasionally. Their father, John Grimke, was a strong slavery supporter and was avid in owning hundreds of slaves. Louise Knight explained that when Sarah moved to Philadelphia, she realized that slavery was a sin in her eyes, and this realization further pushed her and her sister away from their relationship with their family back in South Carolina. Thus, at the time, many people opposed them and what they stood for. Wealthy, profitable landowners and community didn't support them because in their eyes, the Grimke sisters were trying to take away their source of labor. Furthermore, many people of the Episcopalian Church were unhappy with the sisters because their actions publicly rebutted what the Bible said about the need for a master and a servant. The sisters stood out and preached in a time when many didn't. Using this historical background and perspective, it is evident that the Grimke sisters' stand against slavery was a difficult one to make. The sisters grew up in a family that owned slaves, and family was very prominent in their lives. They had 14 siblings and are pictured with a few of them. This gave them a better understanding into the life of slaves. As well, owning slaves, their brother Henry had a relationship with a black woman named Nancy Weston. According to Dr. Manny, Sarah wanted to be a lawyer, but her father forced her out of that job pathway because it wasn't a normal job for her. Both John and Mary Grimke thought that slavery was the way of life and didn't support anything about the work that they were doing. The sisters saw that the treatment of the African Americans was inhumane when they moved to Pennsylvania and became Quakers. They were just becoming entangled with the issues of slavery and realized that slavery was a sin. Further after this, they started to take stands against the barbaric acts of slavery. They spoke out through speeches and letters they wrote as they toured throughout the states. Slavery was prominent at the time in the South, which made it existentially harder for the sisters to speak throughout the country and persuade slave owners to change their way.
The sisters were attacked most strongly when they began to make public speeches to audiences consisting of both genders, a practice that was considered shocking. In 1836, after Sarah was reprimanded for speaking at a Quaker meeting about abolition, the sisters moved to New York to work for its Anti-Slavery Society.
This was as quoted by the Young and Brave Girls Changing History Society. During the context of this time, they were strongly opposed, and it seemed as if they had a single voice that kept being smothered by those who believed in slavery, including their own family and friends back in the South. After growing with a family who owned slaves and living during a tumultuous time when practically everyone owned slaves, the Grimke sisters knew slavery must come to an end. While growing up, Sarah witnessed a slave being badly beaten, and from there on, she began to turn against slavery. They tried their best to help them, which included trying to teach them how to read. She begged her mother to disown the slaves, but her mother would not. The sisters realized that they were getting nowhere, so they knew that they had to act out through speeches and books. They wanted to make sure that it was known that slavery was ruthless and needed to be terminated. Slavery was becoming more prominent in the South, and the sisters knew that they had to take action. The sisters could no longer watch slaves be humanely treated. Thus, Angelina said,
I appeal to you, my friends, as mothers. Are you willing to enslave your children? You stare back with horror and indignation at such questions, but why, if slavery is not wrong for those upon whom it is imposed?
Furthermore, Angelina is quoted to have said,
The denial of our duty to act in this case is a denial of our right to act, and if we have no right to act, then may we well be termed for the white slaves of the North, for like our breathing in bonds, we must seal our lips in silence and despair.
Thus, further condemning her need for a call to action. Angelina lived by a golden rule that ruled the find a need for human rights for all, not just for women and African Americans, but for all. According to Dr. Louise Knight, all of Angelina's motives were trying to convey the need for everyone to follow the golden rule. Sarah also followed this major idea, as she said,
I know nothing of a man's rights or woman's rights. Human rights are all that I recognize.
Thus, throughout this time period, it was not common for women to speak up. So while the sisters were fighting for the lives of the slaves, they were also encouraging women to work together and join the movement for women to speak up for the rights of slaves. While they were fighting for the rights of slaves, they were empowering women to be more independent at the same time, which also helped further the women's rights movement. The Grimke sisters wrote letters, gave speeches, and joined multiple women's leagues, as well as abolitionist movements throughout their stand. At the Women's Loyal National League, Angelina gave a speech, and in it she is quoted with saying,
God be praised. Abolitionists never sought place or power. All they asked was freedom. All they wanted was that the white man should take his foot off the Negro's neck.
Angelina didn't want to pain others. She just wanted to make everyone aware of the pain that they were inflicting on African American people. At one of Angelina's most favorite speeches at the address to Massachusetts legislature in February of 1838, she spoke for 3 days to a packed courtroom full of both men and women, which was an unheard occurrence at the time. She spoke proudly and prominently about the need to end slavery, to continue with her notion of her thoughts on the Golden Rule. Angelina and Sarah Grimke were huge components of making people aware about the impending issue of slavery. Theodore Wells, a good friend and eventual husband of Angelina Grimke, helped with their stand. At first, Angelina and Theodore were friends, but became close pen pals and married with romance with a few children. Despite their friendship, he advised them not to stand up for women's rights and to only be available to help with abolition, because he felt that no one would take them seriously if they stood up for both causes. In a series of letters between them, he was saying that it is absurd that they are publicly giving speeches when women weren't credited with intelligence and especially backing two causes while at the same time being from the South. Thus, Theodore said,
Why, my dear sisters, the best possible advocacy which you can make is just what you are making, day by day. Thousands hear you every week who have all their lives held that women must not speak in public. Such a practical refutation of the dogma as you are speaking furnishes has already converted multitudes. Besides, you are Southerners, have been slaveholders, your dearest friends are all in sin and shame and peril. All these things give you great access to Northern mind, great sway over it. You can do more at convincing the North than 20 Northern females, though they could speak as well as you. Now this peculiar advantage you lose the moment you take another subject.
He appreciated the work that they were doing, acknowledging that it was making a difference and being heard, but he did profoundly state that he did not support the idea of them becoming feminists. He knew that given their status, it would become harder and harder for their voices to be truly heard. Theodore Wells' friend, John Greenleaf Whittier, shared similar beliefs, although he backed the sisters' stand in opposition to abolition. Angelina took a stand in multitudes of ways. She had letters published in multiple journals, The Liberator, and Appeal to the Christian Woman of Southern States. As well, she gave speeches at the Anti-Slavery Convention, and she was involved in the organization of the New York Anti-Slavery Convention. These are just many of the few ways Angelina stood up for what she believed in, human rights for all. There were people who felt that what they were doing was wrong and rebelled against the sisters. In 1835, Angelina faced violent riots and demonstrations against abolitionists and African Americans in New York and Philadelphia. People burned anti-slavery pamphlets in their hometown of Charleston. As well, when Angelina was giving a speech in Philadelphia, a mob attacked the building and set it on fire as an attempt to smother Angelina's voice. Many people tried to stop the sisters from speaking out. They were warned by many people about speaking in public on their fight to end slavery, but they didn't listen. The sisters continued to speak their mind. In the Bible, it quotes that there should be a two-class system and outlines why it partially defends slavery. This made things especially hard for the sisters to continue to speak throughout America because they were publicly rebutting the Bible. Furthermore, Angelina stated that her friends would even turn on her, despite their beliefs, in fear of the law or other opinions. At the Women's National Loyal League, Angelina is quoted with saying,
"I know what the South is. I lived there the best part of my life. I never could talk against slavery without making my friends angry. Never. When they thought the day was far off and there was no danger of emancipation, they were willing to admit it was an evil. But when God, in His providence, raised up in this country an anti-slavery society protesting against the oppressions of the colored man, they began to feel that truth which is more powerful than arms, that truth which is the only banner under which we can successfully fight."
Although Angelina and Sarah Grimke were opposed throughout their stand, they did have supporters. People like Abe Lincoln, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Lucretia Mott were successful in helping them carry out their stand. Lucretia Mott was a fellow abolitionist, and she inspired the Grimkes and was a fellow woman for anti-slavery. They traveled around collecting more supporters at different meetings, such as the meeting held at the Anti-Slavery Convention in New York and the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. Sarah and Angelina's work encouraged other women to have a voice, paved the way for a revolution. Other women like Sue Monk Kidd found inspiration in the sisters to write a book called The Invention of Wings. Herself, along with other women, are now tour guides to the Grimke Museum. Furthermore, Angelina is strongly accredited with the eventual abolition of slavery and women's rights being achieved. Angelina has written,
"I want to be identified with the Negro. Until he gets his rights, we shall never have ours."
The Gilder Lehrman Institute writes,
Over her lifetime, her work had been guided by a vision that both racial and gender equality would one day be realities. Those of us who studied the abolition of slavery and the winning of suffrage for women recognized her role in achieving both.
Angelina knew that through her work she would try to create an outcome. She wanted both slaves and women alike to be greatly represented. Amidst the chaos of her situation, Angelina knew what she wanted to do. She thought that
women ought to feel a peculiar sympathy in the colored man's wrong, for like him, she had been accused of mental inferiority and denied the privileges of a liberal education.
As an end to a great career and an end to the two of the smartest, most intelligent, and bravest women I've ever researched, the Grimkes sadly passed on. Both Sarah and Angelina alike have survived long enough to see their dreams come through with the real beginning to an end of slavery and the spark of a woman's big rights movement. She lived to see her ultimate dream become accomplished. As slavery came to an end and the 15th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, which granted African Americans the right to vote, their dreams were soon realized. The sisters led a very compelling life, and their work with the stand they took against slavery and towards abolition propelled our nation into that of further acceptance. Dr. Manny stated that
the Grimke sisters most definitely contributed to the greater cause of abolition and successfully helped join other women in furthering their cause to the present-day success we now have attained.
Thus, during the early to mid-1800s, Sarah and Angelina Grimke effectively took a stand against slavery by traveling throughout America with speeches and books which eventually supplied a voice to those who opposed slavery and reversed the eventual view as African Americans as property. Eventually, slavery was abolished and women's rights became more prevalent, and both Grimke sisters can be strongly accredited with that.